The boardroom of Blackwood Industries had always intimidated me. 24 floors above downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, it was designed to project power and success. The mahogany conference table could seat 20 people, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. Oil paintings of company founders lined the walls, their stern faces watching over every meeting with silent judgment. I'd been coming to this room for family board meetings since I was 16 years old, but somehow I always felt like an outsider looking in. Today that feeling was about to become literal. "Victoria, you're early," my Uncle Richard said without looking up from the financial documents spread across his end of the table. At 62, Richard Blackwood was the current CEO of the family construction company that his grandfather had founded in 1952. He'd taken over when my father died 8 years ago, and he'd made it clear from day one that he considered me a temporary inconvenience rather than a legitimate part of the business. "The meeting was called for 10 a.m., I replied, settling into my usual seat halfway down the table. "It's 9:45. "The meeting was called for family members only," my cousin James chimed in from across the table. At 35, James was Richard's oldest son and heir apparent to the CEO position. He'd been groomed for leadership since childhood, and he viewed me with the particular disdain reserved for someone he considered both inferior and threatening. I looked around the room as other family members filed in. My Aunt Catherine took her seat near Richard. She'd married into the family 20 years ago but had somehow earned more respect and influence than I had despite being blood-related. My cousin Amanda, James's younger sister, was setting up her laptop to take minutes. Various other relatives and in-laws found their seats around the table. "I am family," I said quietly. "Dad owned 30% of this company. I inherited his shares." "You inherited voting rights," Richard corrected without looking at me. "That doesn't make you qualified to participate in strategic business decisions." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus Webb, our company's chief financial officer. Marcus had been with Blackwood Industries for 15 years, working his way up from junior accountant to his current position through sheer competence and political savvy. He nodded politely to everyone as he took his seat near the head of the table. "Now that everyone's here," Richard began, "we can get started on the real business." "Everyone isn't here," I pointed out. "We're missing 2 board members." "The external board members aren't needed for this discussion," James said dismissively. "This is about internal family matters." I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. In the 8 years since my father's death, family board meetings had increasingly become exercises in making me feel unwelcome while discussing decisions that directly affected my inheritance. "What family matters?" I asked. Richard finally looked directly at me, his expression cold and calculating. "We're discussing the future direction of Blackwood Industries. Specifically, some changes that need to be made to ensure the company's continued success." He gestured to Marcus, who began distributing folders to everyone around the table. "Everyone except me. This is confidential strategic planning material," Marcus explained when he skipped over my seat. "Family members only." "I am a family member," I repeated, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. "Victoria," my Aunt Catherine said in the patronizing tone she'd perfected over the years, "you're 28 years old with a liberal arts degree and no business experience. This discussion involves complex financial and strategic matters that require expertise you simply don't have." "I have an MBA from Wharton," I pointed out. "A degree you earned 2 years ago," James said with a dismissive wave. "Meanwhile, I've been working in this business for over a decade, learning operations from the ground up." "Working in this business," I repeated, while I was kept out of any meaningful involvement despite owning 30% of the company. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me with the expression he might use to examine an unpleasant insect. "Victoria, your father made a mistake when he left you those shares. He was sentimental about family legacy, but business isn't about sentiment. It's about competence." The words hit me like a physical blow. My father had been Richard's younger brother, and growing up, I'd heard stories about how they'd worked together to expand the company beyond what their grandfather had ever imagined. But after Dad's sudden heart attack when I was 20, Richard had systematically worked to minimize my role in the family business. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. We're exploring options for restructuring the ownership of Blackwood Industries to better align voting rights with operational responsibilities. In plain English, James added with obvious satisfaction, we're buying out your shares. The room went quiet except for the sound of traffic from 24 floors below. I looked around the table at faces that had been part of my family gatherings for my entire life, seeing a mixture of guilt, determination, and anticipation. You want to force me to sell my inheritance, I said slowly. We want to offer you fair market value for shares that you're not qualified to hold, Richard corrected. You'll walk away with several $1 million. More money than most people see in a lifetime. Money that will allow you to pursue whatever career interests you have, Catherine added helpfully. Without the burden of trying to manage business responsibilities you're not prepared for. I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest. This wasn't a negotiation or a business discussion. This was a coordinated effort to push me out of my own family company. And if I refuse to sell? Then you'll continue to be a minority shareholder with no real influence, James said bluntly. We control 70% of the voting shares. We can make decisions with or without your approval. But it would be much cleaner if you cooperated, Richard added. For everyone involved. I stood up slowly, my mind racing through everything that had led to this moment. 8 years of being excluded from operational decisions. 8 years of being patronized and dismissed despite my education and qualifications. 8 years of watching my family systematically work to remove me from my father's legacy. I need some time to think about this, I said. Of course, Richard replied, though his tone suggested he considered my acceptance a foregone conclusion. Take all the time you need. But remember, this offer won't remain available indefinitely. Actually, James said with a smirk, I think it would be better if Victoria left now. The rest of our discussion really is family business only. I am family, I said for the third time, but my voice lacked conviction. Get out. This is family only, Richard suddenly barked, his voice echoing off the conference room walls. You don't belong here. The transformation was startling. The polite, businesslike facade had dropped completely, revealing the raw hostility that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Richard, Catherine said softly, there's no need to. There's every need, Richard interrupted. I've spent 8 years pretending that Victoria has some legitimate role in this company, and I'm tired of the charade. She's a dilettante with an expensive degree and no practical experience. Her father never should have left her those shares. James was grinning openly now. Should I call security? That won't be necessary, I said quietly, gathering my purse and walking toward the door with as much dignity as I could muster. But Richard wasn't finished. Marcus, call building security. I want Victoria escorted out of the building. And make sure she understands that she's not welcome at future board meetings unless she's here to sign sale documents. The humiliation was complete. I waited by the elevator as 2 security guards appeared, their expressions embarrassed but professional. They rode down with me in silence, escorting me through the lobby like I was some kind of corporate criminal. Standing on the sidewalk outside Blackwood Industries, looking up at the building that housed my father's life work, I felt something shift inside me. Not breaking, hardening, crystallizing into something sharp and focused. I pulled out my phone and made a call. Jonathan? It's Victoria Blackwood. I need to see you immediately. Can you meet me at your office in an hour? Jonathan Myers had been my father's lawyer and close friend for over 20 years. He'd handled the estate planning when Dad died, and he'd been the one to explain to 18-year-old me that I was now a significant shareholder in a multi-million-dollar company. An hour later, I was sitting in Jonathan's office, a modest space that was the complete opposite of the corporate grandeur I'd just been expelled from. Jonathan was in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but his legal mind was as sharp as ever. Victoria, he said after I'd explained what had happened, I'm sorry your family treated you that way. But I have to ask, are you absolutely certain you want to pursue this course of action? I'm certain, I replied. How quickly can it be done? Jonathan pulled out a thick folder from his filing cabinet. I've been hoping you'd never need this, but your father asked me to prepare contingency plans in case something like this ever happened. He opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. Your father suspected that Richard might try to push you out of the company, Jonathan explained. So he made some arrangements to protect your interests. I leaned forward, studying the documents. What kind of arrangements? Several things. First, he established a trust that holds an additional 20% of Blackwood Industries shares. The trust was designed to activate only under specific circumstances. Specifically, if you were ever forced out of company leadership or if your ownership rights were threatened. My heart began to race. 20% on top of my 30%? That's right. Which would give you 50%, a controlling interest. Jonathan pointed to another document. But there's more. Your father also negotiated right of first refusal agreements with several of the external shareholders. If those shares ever came up for sale, you'd have the option to purchase them before anyone else. Are any of those shares currently for sale? Jonathan smiled. As a matter of fact, yes. The Henderson Group has been looking to liquidate their 15% stake for the past 6 months. They approached Richard about it, but he didn't have the liquidity to make the purchase. I did some quick math in my head. So I could potentially control 65% of the company? If you have the financial resources, Jonathan confirmed. The Henderson stake is valued at approximately $45 million. I thought about the conversation I'd had with my investment advisor just last week. The tech startup I'd invested in 3 years ago, against my family's advice and with money from my personal trust fund, had just been acquired by a major corporation. My original $2 million investment was now worth over $60 million. I have the resources, I said quietly. Jonathan studied my face carefully. Victoria, buying control of Blackwood Industries would be expensive and complicated. Are you sure this is about more than just getting revenge on your uncle? I thought about the question seriously. Was this just about revenge? Or was it about something deeper? Jonathan, I've spent 8 years watching Richard run my father's company into the ground. Profits are down, employee morale is terrible, and we've lost 3 major contracts in the past year alone. I didn't get an MBA just to be a passive investor. I got it because I want to build something meaningful. And you think you can turn the company around? I know I can, I said with more confidence than I'd felt in years. I've been analyzing Blackwood's financials for months, developing strategies that could increase profitability by 30% within 2 years. But every time I've tried to present ideas to the board, I've been dismissed as inexperienced. Jonathan nodded slowly. All right. If you're serious about this, I can have the paperwork ready by this afternoon. The trust activation is automatic once I file the proper documents. The Henderson purchase will take a few hours to arrange, but their lawyers are expecting a potential buyer. How long until I can call a new board meeting? Once you control the majority shares, you can call a meeting immediately. Legally, you'll have the authority to replace the entire board of directors if you choose. 3 hours after being escorted out of the Blackwood Industries building by security, I was walking back into the lobby as the new majority shareholder. Jonathan walked beside me, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents that transferred control of my father's company back to his daughter. We took the elevator to the 24th floor, where the board meeting was still in session. I could hear voices from the conference room. My family was clearly having an animated discussion about something. I knocked on the door and waited. Come in, Richard called out. I opened the door and stepped into the room with Jonathan close behind me. The conversation stopped abruptly as everyone turned to stare at us. Victoria, Richard said, his voice tight with annoyance. I thought I made it clear that you're not welcome at this meeting. Actually, I said, walking slowly around the table toward Richard's chair, I'm here to call a new meeting. As the majority shareholder of Blackwood Industries. The silence that followed was absolute. What are you talking about? James demanded. I nodded to Jonathan, who began distributing copies of the legal documents to everyone around the table. As of 1 hour ago, Jonathan announced in his professional lawyer's voice, Victoria Blackwood controls 65% of Blackwood Industries through a combination of inherited shares, trust activation and a new stock purchase. Richard's face had gone completely white. That's impossible. The Henderson Group was happy to sell their 15% stake, I explained calmly. Apparently they'd lost confidence in current management. I gestured toward Richard's chair at the head of the table. Uncle, would you mind moving? I believe that seat belongs to the majority shareholder now. Richard stood up slowly, his movements mechanical and stunned. His face had turned an unhealthy gray color, and for a moment I worried he might actually faint. "You can't do this," he whispered. "Actually, she can," Jonathan confirmed. "The bylaws of Blackwood Industries clearly state that the majority shareholder has the authority to call board meetings and direct company operations." I settled into the CEO's chair, feeling the weight of responsibility and power settling on my shoulders. The view from this end of the table was different. I could see every face, read every expression, command every bit of attention. "Now then," I said, looking around at my family members who were staring at me in various states of shock, anger, and disbelief. "Let's discuss the future of Blackwood Industries." "Victoria," Catherine said, her voice shaky, "you can't just walk in here and take over the company. There are procedures, protocols." "All of which I'm following perfectly," I interrupted. "Jonathan, would you please explain the legal situation?" Jonathan cleared his throat and began reading from the corporate bylaws. As he spoke, I watched my family's faces, seeing the moment when each of them realized that everything had changed irrevocably. Marcus, the CFO, was the first to adapt to the new reality. "Ms. Blackwood," he said formally, "what are your immediate priorities for company operations?" "My first priority," I said, "is a complete financial audit. I want to understand exactly where we stand, what our debts are, and which contracts are profitable." "We just completed quarterly financials," James protested. "Completed by the same management team that's overseen a 40% decline in profitability over the past 3 years, I replied. "I want an independent audit." Richard finally found his voice. "Victoria, you're making a mistake. You don't understand how complicated this business is. You'll destroy everything your grandfather and father built." "What they built," I said firmly, "was a company based on quality work, fair treatment of employees, and strong community relationships. What you've built is a company focused solely on short-term profits at the expense of everything else." I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying and distributed copies of my own analysis to everyone around the table. "I've spent the past 2 years developing a comprehensive business plan for Blackwood Industries," I announced. "Employee satisfaction surveys, client feedback analysis, competitive market research, and financial projections for sustainable growth." Amanda, who had been silent throughout the entire confrontation, finally spoke up. "You've been planning this for 2 years?" "I've been preparing for the possibility that I might need to take control of the company," I corrected. "I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. I hoped that you would eventually accept me as a legitimate part of the family business." "And now?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now I'm offering each of you a choice," I said. "You can work with me to rebuild Blackwood Industries into the kind of company our family can be proud of, or you can find other employment." The silence stretched on for several minutes. Finally, Marcus spoke up. "What would working with you involve?" I opened my business plan to the organizational chart I'd developed. "Marcus, you're an excellent CFO, and I'd like you to continue in that role. However, there will be new emphasis on long-term financial planning and employee compensation." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I can work with that." I turned to Amanda. "You have a degree in communications and experience in project management. I'd like to offer you the position of Director of Client Relations, a new position focused on rebuilding the relationships that have been damaged over the past few years." Amanda looked surprised but interested. "What about my current responsibilities?" "Board meeting minutes can be handled by administrative staff," I said. "I'm more interested in utilizing your actual skills and education." I looked at James and Richard, the 2 family members who had been most hostile to my involvement. "James, you have operational experience, but your management style has contributed to employee turnover and client dissatisfaction. I'm willing to offer you a position as a project manager, but you'll be working under new supervision and new policies." James's face was red with anger. "Project manager? I've been running entire divisions. And those divisions have been underperforming," I replied calmly. "This is an opportunity to learn different approaches and prove that you can adapt to new leadership." I turned finally to Richard. "Uncle, you're welcome to remain with the company as a senior advisor. Your experience is valuable, but your management decisions over the past 8 years have nearly destroyed what Dad and Grandpa built. I won't let that continue." Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I won't work for you. You're an inexperienced child who thinks an MBA makes her qualified to run a construction company. That's your choice, I said evenly. But if you leave, you'll be giving up the opportunity to be part of rebuilding something great. This is insane, Richard said, looking around the table for support. She's 28 years old. She's never managed a construction project, never dealt with unions, never negotiated major contracts. You're right, I agreed. I haven't done those things yet. But I've spent 2 years studying how to do them better than they've been done recently. And I have the financial resources and legal authority to implement changes immediately. I stood up and walked to the windows, looking out over the city where Blackwood Industries had built dozens of commercial and residential projects over the decades. Richard, when Dad died, he left me 30% of this company because he believed I could help carry on the family legacy. You've spent 8 years trying to prove him wrong. But the numbers don't lie. Under your leadership, we've lost market share, employee loyalty, and client confidence. I turned back to face the room. I'm not asking you to follow me because I'm young or idealistic. I'm asking you to follow me because I have a plan that will work, and I have the power to implement it. And if we refuse? Catherine asked. Then you'll receive generous severance packages and positive references for future employment, I said. I'm not interested in punishing anyone. I'm interested in building a successful company. The meeting lasted another 2 hours as we worked through the immediate logistics of the transition. By the end, Marcus and Amanda had agreed to continue with the company under new leadership. James had grudgingly accepted the project manager position, though his resentment was obvious. Catherine decided to take early retirement. Richard walked out without saying another word. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same conference room, but everything was different. The room had been redecorated with warmer colors and more comfortable furniture. The windows were open, letting in fresh air and natural light. The oppressive atmosphere of corporate intimidation had been replaced with something that felt more like a collaborative workspace. The quarterly board meeting was just ending and the mood was celebratory. Blackwood Industries had just reported its most profitable quarter in 5 years. Employee satisfaction scores were up 40%. We'd signed 3 major new contracts and had been featured in Construction Weekly as a company to watch. Outstanding work, everyone, I said to the assembled team. Marcus, your financial restructuring plan is exceeding all projections. Amanda, client satisfaction scores have never been higher. Even James had adapted to the new environment, though it had taken some time. His division was now performing better than it had in years, largely because the new employee-focused policies had reduced turnover and improved morale. After everyone else had left, I remained in the conference room, looking out at the city skyline and thinking about everything that had changed. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Victoria, this is your Uncle Richard. I saw the article in Construction Weekly. Congratulations on what you've built. I was wrong about your capabilities and I owe you an apology. If you're ever willing to talk, I'd like to have coffee and hear about your plans for the company. I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the humiliation I'd felt 6 months ago when security had escorted me out of this building. Remembering the satisfaction I'd felt when I'd walked back in as the majority shareholder. But more than anything, I remembered my father's voice telling me that the best revenge wasn't getting even. It was building something so successful that your critics had no choice but to acknowledge your achievements. I typed back a simple response. Coffee sounds good. How about Thursday at 10 a.m.? 3 days later, I was sitting across from Richard in a small cafe downtown, listening as he apologized for years of dismissive treatment and asked thoughtful questions about the company's future direction. Victoria, he said as our conversation was winding down, I need you to know that your father would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. Not just the financial success, but the way you've honored the family legacy while making it your own. Thank you, I said. That means more to me than you know. Would you consider having me back? He asked quietly. Not as CEO, I understand that ship has sailed. But maybe as a senior consultant? I have 40 years of experience and I think I could contribute to what you're building. I thought about the request for a moment. 6 months ago I might have said no out of spite. But the woman who had rebuilt Blackwood Industries wasn't interested in holding grudges. Let me think about it, I said. But Richard, if you come back, it has to be with the understanding that this is my company now. My vision, my leadership, my responsibility. I understand completely, he said. And Victoria? For what it's worth, I think you're a better leader at 28 than I ever was. 1 year after being thrown out of the family business meeting, I was featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine as one of the top 40 under 40 business leaders. The article detailed how I'd transformed a struggling construction company into one of the most successful and innovative firms in the region. The photo showed me standing in the renovated Blackwood Industries conference room, surrounded by the team that had helped make the transformation possible. In the background, you could see the city skyline where our projects were changing communities for the better. The headline read, "Building More Than Buildings: How Victoria Blackwood Turned Family Rejection into Business Revolution." But my favorite part of the article was the quote they'd chosen to highlight. "Sometimes the best way to honor your family's legacy is to have the courage to make it better than it was before."